Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Xavier Carter. I am 41 years old, and I am sitting in what used to be our bedroom in my house in Charlotte, North Carolina, staring at the engagement ring Jasmine Parker left on the dresser as if it were an object that could answer me back. 3 months ago, I believed I was the luckiest man alive. Today, I am a man who learned, in a way that carved new lines in my face, that when a person shows you red flags, you ignore them at your peril. I met Jasmine 2 years ago at a charity golf tournament on the south side of Charlotte. She was volunteering at the registration table with her hair pulled into a neat bun and a polished smile that made everyone feel welcome. I was playing badly and trying to hide it. She laughed when I sliced a warm-up shot into a stand of pines and said she had never seen someone commit to a terrible swing with such courage. I told her I had many gifts, including catastrophic athletic follow-through, and she laughed again. I bought her a drink at the clubhouse after the round. It felt like a scene from a movie because everything seemed to line up with what I thought I wanted. A confident woman who met my gaze and did not flinch. Jasmine was beautiful, ambitious, and had a polished presence that slid into any room as if it had been designed for her. She worked as a marketing director at a local technology startup in Uptown. She talked about brand narratives and user acquisition with quick, bright hands that sliced the air. I had been divorced for 5 years, and I had built a life that was steady. I am a senior engineer for an energy firm headquartered in Charlotte, with a team that trusts me, a reputation for solving complicated problems, and a home I purchased after the divorce with my own savings. I had retirement accounts and some investments and a sense that my life made sense. Jasmine seemed to appreciate that I was stable and had my act together. She said men her age often felt like they were auditioning for their own potential and never actually showed up. She liked that I was already in the room. We moved quickly because it felt right at the time. Dinners turned into weekends together. We developed rituals. Friday night takeout from a spot we both liked in South End. Saturday morning coffee on my back deck, looking over a stand of oaks. Sunday evening grocery runs where she teased me for sticking to a list like it was a sacred text. She posted our moments with enthusiastic captions and gentle angles of sunlight. My friends were cautiously optimistic. My friend Keith told me to slow down. My friend Brian told me to be happy. I told both of them I had earned this peace and I wanted to hold it. When I proposed last year, it was quiet and careful, just the two of us at her favorite restaurant near Freedom Park. I had a ring she had once admired in a window when we were walking past on a rainy afternoon. She cried and said yes with both hands over her mouth. She called her mother, Elaine, and her sister, Alana. Afterward, her voice bright and breathless. I felt relief and joy braided together. I had done the hard work of rebuilding after a divorce, and now I was ready to build something lasting with someone who looked at me like I was the answer to a question she had always carried. The wedding planning gathered speed. Venues and menus and colors and seating charts swooped into our conversations. Her sister hosted tastings, and her friends debated over flower arrangements. I found myself leaning into lists and logistics, because logistics are what I do when I do not know what else to do. We were 6 weeks out when Jasmine told me, over grilled salmon at my dining table on a Tuesday, that she did not want to sign a prenuptial agreement. The words landed softly and then grew sharp. I set my fork down and tried to slow the beat of my heart. I said we had discussed this. I reminded her that I have the house, retirement accounts, and some investments, and that she has student loans, and that a prenuptial agreement protects both of us by clarifying what is mine and what is hers. She stared at me with a small tilt of her head and said if I really trusted her, I would not need legal documents to prove it. She paused, twirled her wine glass, and added that she thought I should add her to the house deed before the wedding to show that I was serious about us being equals. I nearly choked on my water because the request was so direct it rewired the room. Add you to the deed on the house I bought by myself. She smiled and said partners share everything, and she asked why we would get married if I was not willing to share my life with her. There was an edge in her voice I had not heard before, or maybe I had ignored it, because I wanted the future she represented more than I wanted to see the present clearly. I said I needed to think about it. She squeezed my hand and said she knew I would understand. She mentioned her friend Carlton Hayes, a lawyer she knew from her gym in South End, who could handle the paperwork and make it easy. I had heard the name Carlton a lot over the preceding months. She said he was helpful with legal advice. I had never met him. That night, I could not get my breathing to slow. My house had been my anchor after my divorce. The deed was a symbol of what I had built with discipline and sacrifice. The idea of putting someone else on it without protection felt like stepping onto a dock that might not be fastened to the shore. The next morning, I called my divorce attorney, Howard Green, a man whose calm tone had once walked me back from the edge of expensive mistakes. I explained the situation. He listened and then said slowly that I should not add anyone to that deed. He suggested I get the house appraised immediately. When I asked why, he explained that if she were added to the deed and the marriage failed, she could force a sale and be entitled to a portion of the equity even if she had not contributed a cent to the mortgage. He called the idea of having her friend handle the deed transfer a red flag, and the phrase vibrated in my chest like a struck string. I hired an appraiser that week and told Jasmine I was getting it done for insurance purposes. She seemed excited in a way that did not match the explanation. The appraiser came, measured, inspected, and left with polite efficiency. The report had not yet arrived when Jasmine brought up the value over dinner, as if she had seen the numbers. She said, almost absently, that the house would be worth close to $700,000, and we could do so much with that equity. I had not told her the number. My stomach tightened into a hard knot. Only the appraiser would know the exact figures, and the appraiser had not sent the report. I asked Jasmine how she knew that number. She froze for a fraction of a second, and then said that I had mentioned it. I said I had not. She said she assumed that houses in our area were going for that much. The air felt heavy with something unsaid. I smiled and nodded and washed the plates. That night, I contacted a private investigator because my gut refused to be quiet. I felt scummy, but I also felt like a man standing in front of a locked door with smoke leaking through the cracks. I gave the private investigator Jasmine's information and Carlton's name. I told him to see what he could find. 3 days later, he called and asked if I was sitting down. He said Carlton was not just a lawyer friend. He said they had been meeting at hotels twice a week for the past 4 months. He said he had photos. He said the images were explicit. My hands went numb. I asked him to send them. He did. The images arrived in a neat folder with timestamps that reached backward to before Jasmine had started pushing against the prenuptial agreement. There they were, Jasmine and Carlton at a Marriott near the interstate, at his apartment in a mid-rise complex near South Park, in his car in a dimly lit parking lot. The private investigator called again and said there was more. He said Carlton was drowning in debt, that he had dabbled in real estate and failed twice, that he specialized in property law, and more specifically in partition sales. I asked what that meant. He explained that when co-owners of a property cannot agree, a partition action can force a sale, so both parties can get their share, and he said that was Carlton's niche. The pieces clicked with a cruel logic that made my skin feel too tight. If Jasmine were on the deed, married or not, she could force me to sell and would be entitled to a portion of the equity. She and Carlton could split it and disappear into a life they had been constructing in whispers. The numbers rolled through my head like a bad drumbeat. The appraised value would likely show a gain of a couple $100,000. I imagined them counting future dollars in the low light of a hotel room and felt my jaw go hard. I stared at the images on my computer, and the life I thought I was building wavered and then collapsed into a pile of facts. The rage that rose was hot and then cool in a way that focused me. I decided to wait. I decided to plan. Jasmine's bridal shower was in 2 weeks. I knew exactly when and where. Her sister, Alana, had mentioned it. A Saturday afternoon at her home in a quiet neighborhood in University City. 40 guests. A backyard tent. A cake with edible flowers. I pictured white and gold decorations, laughter, and a microphone for toasts. I thought about the truth and about timing. During the next 2 weeks, I was an actor good enough to fool an audience that included people who knew me well. I was the perfect fiancé. I helped with seating and rentals. I edited the playlist and offered to handle transportation for out-of-town relatives. I even agreed to meet Carlton to discuss the deed transfer. Meeting him face-to-face taught me something I did not want to learn but needed to know. He had a spray tan and wore expensive cologne and called me buddy a dozen times. He said I was lucky to have Jasmine. He smirked while he talked about deed language, as if he were letting me into an inside joke. The private investigator stayed on retainer and delivered more images and a recording that landed like a hammer. He captured audio of Jasmine and Carlton in Carlton's car, their voices low and confident. I listened to Jasmine say that I was sweet but boring, that once they got the house sold they could finally be together, that they would clear at least $300,000 after the sale. Carlton told her she was brilliant. She told him she had learned from the best. They kissed. I leaned over my office trash can and threw up. I rinsed my mouth and looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I could not reconcile the voice I heard with the woman who had tray circles on my chest while talking about honeymoon options. The day of the bridal shower arrived with clear skies and a soft breeze. The backyard of Alana's house was decorated in white and gold, just as I had pictured. The tent fluttered. Her mother, Elaine, greeted guests with a graciousness that told me where Jasmine learned her polished smile. Laughter washed across the lawn like music. I was not supposed to be there because it was a women-only event. I arrived anyway, because clarity does not wait for permission. Elaine opened the front door and looked stunned to see me. She said it was bad luck for the groom to crash the bridal shower. I said I had something important to share with everyone about the wedding. She studied my face the way mothers do when they are searching for a lie and invited me in with a sigh. I stepped through the kitchen, past a table full of deviled eggs and fruit and sparkling water, and out into the yard where Jasmine sat on a chair with a sash that read bride-to-be. Jasmine's eyes widened when she saw me. Surprise flickered into annoyance, and then into the practiced smile she wore in photographs. She asked what I was doing there. I walked to the center of the party, aware that 40 pairs of eyes were watching me, and that every choice I made was now a performance with consequences. I said I was sorry to interrupt, but there was something everyone needed to see before we continued with the festivities. My voice was calm in a way I did not feel. I connected my phone to Alana's Bluetooth speaker system using a password she had given me in a casual moment months ago. I pressed play on the audio the private investigator had recorded in Carlton's car. Jasmine's voice filled the backyard, clear and unmistakable. She said she almost felt bad, almost. She said I was sweet but boring. She said once they got the house sold, they could finally be together for real. A hush fell so deep I could hear the tent fabric ripple in the breeze. Jasmine stood up too fast, and her tiara slipped. She said that was not what it sounded like. Her voice was high and tight. I held up printed photographs, one after another, images of Jasmine and Carlton at the Marriott off the interstate, Jasmine and Carlton in the hallway at his apartment building, Jasmine and Carlton in his car with their faces lit by the dashboard. I stood close enough to Elaine to ensure she saw. I said it was exactly what it sounded like. I said Jasmine had been having an affair for months. I said Jasmine and Carlton had been planning to get me to add her to my house deed, so they could force a sale and split the money. There was a gasp and the sound of a champagne flute shattering against patio stone. Elaine began to cry, a low, injured sound. She begged Jasmine to tell me I was wrong. Jasmine turned toward me, and her expression shifted into something that looked like rage peeled of its composure. She asked if I had hired someone to follow her. She called me a psychopath. She said it was illegal. I said it was not illegal to follow a person in public, and it was not illegal to record two people conspiring to commit fraud in a parking lot. Her sister, Alana, looked at her with disbelief bordering on revulsion and asked what Jasmine was doing. Jasmine told her to be quiet, said she would not understand. She said I was loaded and could afford it, and that the house was half hers anyway. I said she had been living in my house for 8 months, paying 0 rent and 0 utilities, contributing nothing to the mortgage, while planning to rob me. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. A cousin I barely knew stood and told me I should leave. I said I would go, but first I had a delivery to make. I handed Jasmine a manila envelope. I said she had been served. I said it was an eviction notice. I said she had 30 days to leave my home. I said her belongings had already been boxed with care by my friends Keith and Brian and moved into a storage unit on Riverside Drive. I said the first month was paid, and after that it was on her. Jasmine stepped toward me, and her hands curled into fists. Elaine and Alana held her back. Jasmine told me I could not kick her out because we were engaged. I said we were not engaged anymore. I said the venue and the vendors had been canceled. I said I'd send the emails an hour earlier. I said Carlton's wife, Sabrina, had received copies of everything, so she would know what her husband had been doing. Jasmine's face drained of color. The name Sabrina landed like a strike. Sabrina called me later that night, her voice steady in the way people sound when they're standing on a raft in rough water and have decided to ride it out with dignity. She said she wanted to thank me, and then she corrected herself and said she wanted to thank me for saving her years of her life. She said she had suspected something but could not prove it. She said she was pregnant with their second child. She said she was filing for divorce on Monday. She said her attorney had reviewed the evidence I provided and told her she had strong leverage. Her calm made the room around me feel more solid. I left the bridal shower to the sound of chaos. Jasmine screamed. Elaine tried to calm her. Guests fled with murmurs and narrowed eyes. Alana texted me later and said she was sorry, that she had no idea that Jasmine had broken a stack of plates and accused everyone of betrayal. She added, with a confused kind of humor, that if there were an award for dramatic exits, I had just won it. I lay awake that night on the couch because the bedroom felt spoiled and I did not want to breathe that air. The following days were a parade of reactions. Jasmine showed up in my office lobby with tears and mascara and demanded to talk. Security walked her out with quiet firmness. Elaine called to ask if there was any way to reconsider. I told her I respected her, but the answer was no. Jasmine sent me a text with a dramatic farewell and a threat that made my hands go cold. I called 911 and asked for a wellness check because I will always choose safety over cynicism. The officers found Jasmine at her apartment eating takeout and watching a series. She was fine. She posted about her abusive ex-fiancé on her social media accounts. I responded with 2 photographs that told the truth and then stopped engaging. She deleted her posts within an hour. Carlton began calling and texting me as if he had the right. He threatened lawsuits for defamation. He threatened harassment claims. My attorney, Howard, sent a cease and desist letter that sounded like iron. Carlton went quiet. Then the insurance claim adjuster contacted me regarding the damage to my truck because 2 weeks after the shower, I received a call from building security that made my body feel heavy. They told me there was a situation in the parking garage. I knew before I stepped into the elevator that Jasmine had done something I could not politely explain away. My truck was a ruin of shattered glass and slashed tires, the panels keyed into a map of anger. Jasmine stood near it with a baseball bat, crying and screaming that I had ruined her life, that Carlton would not talk to her, that Sabrina was divorcing him, that her family considered her a disgrace, and that it was my fault. I lifted my phone and recorded. I said she was on camera destroying my property. She swung the bat toward me and missed because rage tips your balance. She fell hard on the concrete. The police arrived and arrested her. The damage was over $12,000, which placed the charges into a category her attorney later called serious. Elaine bailed Jasmine out the next day, but the image of her in handcuffs moved through our social circles like a stain. Carlton began telling people Jasmine had seduced him, and that it was all her idea. I felt insulted on behalf of the truth. Also, I felt relieved that I had documented everything. My insurance covered my losses, and they told me they would pursue Jasmine for the full amount plus legal fees. I did not celebrate. I went for a long walk around my neighborhood while the sun sank behind the trees and tried to remember how it felt to live a life that did not include a crisis every other day. The calls did not stop. Jasmine's former employer reached out to me through an attorney and said they had discovered she had used her company credit card to pay for hotel rooms and meals with Carlton. The totals were not small. They said they were pressing charges for embezzlement. Jasmine's new lawyer called Howard to discuss a possible plea deal. They wanted to know whether I intended to pursue additional civil claims. Howard asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted a restraining order that never expired, written admissions of the affair and the attempted fraud, and restitution for my truck. I said I wanted quiet. They accepted because they had little choice. The restraining order is permanent. Jasmine's letter sits in my attorney's file cabinet, crisp and undeniable. She wrote that she engaged in an affair with Carlton Hayes while engaged to me, that she attempted to pressure me into adding her to my deed without a prenuptial agreement, and that the intention was to force a sale and capture equity that did not belong to her. Reading that letter felt like standing in winter without a coat and then stepping inside. Time moved forward. The wedding vendors were surprisingly kind about the cancellations. We recovered partial deposits from the venue in Uptown and from the caterer in Plaza Midwood. I lost about $8,000 overall, which felt like a cheap price compared to what I almost lost. Howard coordinated with Sabrina's attorney and provided statements and copies of evidence. Sabrina obtained the house, both cars, full custody, and alimony, and Carlton's practice took a hit when people learned what he had been up to. The last I heard, he took document review projects at a fraction of his former income and moved into a studio apartment near the highway. I did not feel triumphant. I felt something closer to equilibrium. In the weeks that followed, I tried to rebuild the routines that anchor me. I went back to the gym in the mornings. I returned to my habit of Sunday hikes in Reedy Creek Park where the trails cut through old trees and the air clears your head. My friends came over for card games and grilled chicken. My friend Keith framed the eviction notice I had served Jasmine and hung it in his garage with a little plaque that read, "Trust your gut." He now shows it to new dates with a grin that makes me roll my eyes. And then we laugh because if we cannot laugh at what almost happened, we give it more power than it deserves. Alana began to check in from time to time. She said Jasmine still refused to accept responsibility and still told anyone who would listen that I overreacted. Elaine called me twice to apologize and to ask, with a softness that made me ache, how I was really doing. I told her I was healing and that I did not hold her accountable for her daughter's choices. She told me she hoped I would find someone who deserved me. I told her I hoped Jasmine would one day understand what she had done. I refinanced my house when rates dipped and used some of the equity, that number Jasmine had salivated over, to renovate the kitchen. I chose quartz countertops with a subtle marbling that slides under the light. I replaced the old appliances with efficient ones that hum instead of roar. I selected cabinet poles that fit the shape of my hand. I did the work of choosing tile and paint samples without asking someone to tell me which version of my life looked better in photos. The result is a kitchen where I stand in the morning with a mug of coffee and feel the grounded gratitude of a man who kept his home. At work, I sank into projects that demanded focus and rewarded follow-through. I did not realize how much emotional noise had been pulling at me until silence returned. My manager noticed. I received a promotion. I learned that productivity increases when you are not fighting to protect your life from inside your own house. I told Howard I would happily pay his invoice with a tip if that were a thing. He laughed and told me to recommend him to any friend who needed someone who did not flinch. I started seeing someone new months later, not because I had a checklist to complete, but because I met a woman whose presence made me feel like my best self in my own skin. Her name is Lauren Reed. She is an engineer on a project in a neighboring department. We met in a meeting where the conversation was heated, and she provided a solution that made everyone else stop talking. She owns her own house in a quiet neighborhood not far from mine. On our third date, I joked about prenuptial agreements without any real intention behind the joke, and she said she would insist on one because she believes in clarity, fairness, and clean math. I laughed softly and felt something in my chest unclench. I want to be clear about something. I did not enjoy exposing Jasmine. I did not relish standing in that backyard with photographs and audio. I'm not a man who measures victories by how much damage is done. But I learned after my divorce, and then learned again with Jasmine, that you must defend the life you are building because no one else will defend it for you. If a person is unfaithful to vows they have not even taken yet and tries to steal what you earned, you do not owe them discretion. You owe yourself courage and precision. The days after the bridal shower unfolded like scenes from a show I would not have believed if I had not lived them. Jasmine tried to break into my home the night after the confrontation. The doorbell camera captured her scratching the lock and then kicking the door and screaming that I owed her. I sent the footage to Howard. He said documentation is oxygen in a case like this. I began to understand the importance of cameras and time-stamped emails and digital trails that you do not think you will ever need until you do. I also began to see the small red flags I had ignored over the previous year with painful clarity. I saw how quickly Jasmine had pushed to move in, how little she wanted to discuss finances except to ask for access to mine, how her tastes outpaced her contributions, how Carlton's name appeared more often in her stories as soon as marriage grew nearer, and how her tone changed from "I love you" to "give me half your house" with a speed I had refused to mark. When the present hurts, the past rewrites itself with sharper edges. Jasmine and I had quiet mornings that felt real, and I will not pretend they did not exist. That is what makes betrayal complicated. Not everything is a lie because one thing is. I remember the morning she danced while stirring pancake batter, and I grinned at the sight because joy is contagious. I remember the evening we argued about whether to paint the guest room a pale gray or a pale blue, and then compromise on a color I now forget because it is just paint. None of that gives her the right to take what is not hers. It just means I will not reduce my life to clean lines for the sake of comfort. Life is messy. Integrity is the rule you bring to the mess. One afternoon, weeks after the restraining order was finalized, I stood in the aisle at a home improvement store comparing door hardware because the scratches on my front lock bothered me more than I wanted to admit. A man in a polo shirt stopped and asked if I was Xavier. I said yes. He said he was Jasmine's co-worker from the startup. He said he wanted me to know that she had been skating across lines for a while, charging personal expenses to corporate cards, and that he felt guilty he had not noticed sooner. I told him he was not responsible for another adult's choices. He nodded and said he learned something about people and about himself, and then he wished me well. I went home and installed a deadbolt. Later that month, Sabrina and I spoke again briefly. She said she had moments of grief that arrived like weather and then passed. She said she took her children to the park near her parents' house in Atlanta to watch them climb and run and relearn the shape of their lives. She said she had begun to collect evidence of Carlton's financial maneuvers, as one might collect shells on a beach, patient and methodical. She thanked me again, and I told her she owed me nothing. We hung up, and I hoped for her a wide, quiet future. When I eventually told Lauren the entire story in a measured way over coffee at my kitchen island, she put her hand on the countertop and listened without interrupting. She asked thoughtful questions. She said it is unsettling that a person can share your bed and treat your life as a hunting ground. She said she respected my restraint. Then she changed the subject to her home's aging water heater and whether I thought she should replace it now or later. The way she moved our conversation from significant to ordinary made me feel like we could carry both without one canceling the other. That balance is a kind of grace. Some nights, I sit on the deck and listen to the distant rhythm of the city and consider how thin the line can be between a good decision and a bad one. If I had caved and added Jasmine to my deed, I would likely be standing in a rented kitchen right now looking at an empty bank account and a list of lessons learned too late. Instead, I stood my ground, and I'm drinking coffee while the sun rises over a stand of oaks I planted myself. That is not an accident. That is the result of paying attention to the truth, even when it hurts to look. I still receive the occasional text from a mutual acquaintance who has not been fully briefed and wants to know what happened. I answer with the minimum necessary detail. I refuse to let the worst moment of that season become the defining story of my life. When I talk about it, I focus on the facts. Jasmine asked to be added to the deed and refused a prenuptial agreement. The appraiser's number leaked somehow. A private investigator revealed an affair and a plan, and I confronted the truth with evidence. I do not add speculation. I do not add spice. Reality has enough flavor. I did learn practical lessons that I carry forward. Documentation matters. Security cameras are worth the upfront cost. Attorneys earn their fees, and private investigators are not just plot devices in crime shows. I learned that equity is not just a number on a spreadsheet. It is a measure of how hard you worked and how carefully you built. I learned that trust is a word that slides out of some mouths easily, and that the proof of trust is not how loudly a person says it, but how consistently they act. I learned that a quiet night at home with someone who knows how to be still is worth more than a glamorous night out with someone who constantly performs. One Saturday, I visited my mother, who lives in a tidy brick house on the west side of Charlotte. She cooked a meal because that is how she loves people. She set plates on the table and looked at me across a bowl of collards and asked me if I was happy. I said I was learning how to be again. She nodded and said that as all happiness is most days, learning how to be. She told me she was proud of me for defending what I had built without becoming bitter. She said bitterness is a thief that knocks afterward and demands more. I hugged her before I left and promised to visit again soon. Jasmine reached out once through a mutual friend, asking to meet for closure. I said I did not believe closure is something a person can hand you if they did not respect you when it mattered. I wished her the kind of clarity that arrives when you stop lying to yourself. I did not meet with her. I do not check her social media. I do not follow up on rumors. I learned that some bridges are meant to remain burned because the ash is a map that reminds you which paths you never want to take again. Keith and Brian still drop by unannounced on certain evenings with a six-pack and stories. We laugh in the kitchen I rebuilt and play cards at the dining table that survived upheaval because furniture is just wood and glue, but it also becomes the place where you remember who you are. Sometimes the conversation drifts to what happened, and one of them cracks a joke about the framed eviction notice in Keith's garage, and we move on. We talk about work, or about the Panthers, or about the best barbecue in town. Normal conversations feel like a luxury after months of drama. On a winter morning, I woke before dawn and sat with a legal pad and wrote down what I want my life to look like in the next 5 years. Stable, honest, generous, challenging in the right ways, quiet in the right ways, full of people who know how to tell the truth gently and directly. I wrote down that I want to grow my garden in the backyard and host dinners that end with people lingering over dessert, and that I want to travel places I have not seen in the United States, New Orleans, Santa Fe, Portland, Seattle, and come home glad my key fits my own front door. I wrote down that I want to keep becoming a version of myself that I respect. I did not miss Jasmine as a person as much as I missed the idea of what I thought we were building. Ideas can be seductive. The story we tell ourselves about our future can be so vivid that we are tempted to forgive reality for contradicting it. I still believe in partnership. I still believe that two people can carry their separate strengths into a room and build something neither could build alone. I simply believe it with more caution now, and with a sharper eye for the difference between performance and character. When spring finally pressed winter out of the trees and the azaleas bloomed along the fence line, Lauren and I spent a Saturday afternoon assembling a simple bookshelf in her home. We argued about whether to sort the books by subject or by author, and compromised by doing both. She laughed at the intensity of my opinions about brackets and anchors. I laughed at myself and told her a man who just survived a war with a house deed likes his shelves extremely stable. We ate takeout on the floor when we were done and watched light move across a wall. There's a way of being together that feels like breathing. I had almost forgotten. On a warm evening in late summer, I found a framed eviction notice in Keith's garage hilarious, and then I found it poignant, and then I found it necessary. It is not a trophy. It is a reminder. It is proof that I did not abandon myself to keep someone else's fantasy intact. It is a small, ridiculous, perfect symbol of a line I drew and did not erase even under pressure. I did not become cruel. I did become precise. Precision can look like coldness to people who prefer mess, because mess leaves room for manipulation. I learned to prefer clean lines. Every so often, I still think about the precise moment Jasmine shifted, the instant she turned a request into an ultimatum by tying love to a deed. If she had asked for a conversation about future plans and contribution and security, we would have had it. She asked for half my house as proof of love. She treated what I built like a prize at the end of a game. That told me everything I needed to know. It just took me a little while to listen to what I already knew. There are people who will read a story like this and say I should have seen it sooner. Maybe they are right. It is easy to put on hindsight and call it wisdom. What I know is this. I loved a woman I thought I knew. I discovered who she really was, and I made choices that protected my future. I did not own the outcomes of her life. I did not celebrate her losses. I simply step carefully now and keep building. When I lock my front door at night, the click is more than a sound. It is a promise to myself. If you walked into my house now, you would see a row of healthy plants in the living room, photographs of my parents in black and white frames, a kitchen that gleams, and a calm across the surfaces that is earned. In my office, there is a drawer that holds a folder with documents that began as wounds and became shields. The appraiser's report, the photographs the private investigator took, and the chain of custody notes he kept, the transcripts, the restraining order, the signed admissions. I do not look at them. I keep them because memory is unreliable and paper does not flinch. I still golf badly. Sometimes I drive past the course where I met Jasmine and feel a brief tug toward the past, and then the feeling falls away. The last time I went out there with Keith, I sliced a shot into a ragged patch of trees, and he laughed so hard he bent over and said he was just glad something in my life remained consistent. I told him I preferred incompetence on the course to incompetence in romance. We argued about whether to try the expensive burger at the clubhouse. We did. It was worth it. I am not interested in turning this into a moral parable. The world is not divided neatly into villains and heroes. People make choices out of fear and pride and greed and loneliness and anger. Those choices have consequences, and sometimes the consequences arrive with sirens and cuffs, and sometimes they arrive as a quiet emptiness that sets in when everyone else has gone home. Jasmine is living with her parents and working at a call center now, because embezzlement is not a line you can erase with charm. Carlton is doing document review and paying support and telling himself a story where he is a victim because victimhood is a cheap shelter. I am living in my house and cooking dinner and learning to love without letting my guard drop at the first warm word. That is the difference. On the anniversary of the day, I confronted Jasmine. I did not mark it with anything dramatic. I grilled salmon on the back deck and ate it with a simple salad and listened to a jazz record. Lauren came by after a late meeting, and we sat with our plates balanced on our knees and talked about the projects we were managing. The night air felt kind. I looked at the stand of oaks and thought about how roots hold when the storm comes. You cannot see the roots from the deck. You feel them when the wind presses hard and the trees sway, but do not crack. I think sometimes about the younger version of myself, the one who found his way to a house after a divorce and stood in the empty living room with a key in his hand and promised to fill those rooms with patience, careful work, and peace. I am proud of that man. I am proud of the way he paused when someone asked him a hand over proof of love in the form of a legal deed. I am proud of the way he picked up the phone and called his attorney. I am proud of the way he walked into a backyard full of white and gold decorations and chose truth over convenience. That man is me. I am him. We share a spine. When people ask me how I'm doing now, I tell them I am good, and I mean it. I'm not fine in the brittle, defensive way. I am good in the solid way that comes from aligning your actions with your values. I wake up early. I make coffee. I stand in the light that squares itself on the kitchen floor, and I think about the simple miracle of choosing wisely at least once each day. I go to work and solve problems that have clear answers. I come home and cook, or I meet friends, or I sit with a book. I rest. I do not chase a story that looks good on a screen. I build a life that feels good in my body. There's a line I wrote on that legal pad that I keep returning to. Protect what you build, and build what you can be proud to protect. It is not poetry. It is a practical mandate. It is what kept me from losing my house. It is what will guide me as I move into the next seasons of my life. I do not need a grand thesis. I need that sentence and the willingness to live it quietly. Some evenings, I drive to Freedom Park and walk around the lake and watch families spread blankets and couples toss a ball back and forth. I sit on a bench and let the noise of people who are not fighting fill me with a gentle hum. I do not think about Jasmine much anymore. When I do, it is not with heat. It is with the cool recognition that some exits are necessary and some endings save you. I breathe deeply and stand and go home, because home is not a place you should be afraid to return to. My name is Xavier Carter, and I keep my front porch light bulb changed and the hinges oiled and the yard trimmed, because maintenance is a form of love. I learn to listen when something in me whispers that something is off. I learn to gather facts before I act. I learn to speak only when I have evidence, and to be silent when I am tempted to dramatize. I learn that trust is not a deed with two names on it. It is a pattern. And when a person breaks that pattern before the vows you have not yet taken, that is not a small crack you can ignore. That is the house telling you it is not safe. This is the life I have now. A kitchen that gleams, a door that locks, friends who show up with laughter, a mother who worries and then relaxes, a woman who looks at me across a room and sees me as I am, a job that uses my strengths, a garden that needs weeding, a file drawer with papers that protect me from a past I survived, and a calendar with dinners and meetings and hikes and time to sit still. If you ask me what I learned, I would tell you it is all in the details. The name on a deed, the line on a credit card statement, the tone of a request, the way a person reacts when you tell them no. The details will tell you the truth if you let them. And when the truth stands in front of you, even if it walks into a backyard and gathers gasps as it speaks, meet it. Meet it with your spine straight and your voice steady and your papers in order. Meet it with the kind of courage that does not need to shout. Then walk back to the life you are choosing, close the door behind you, and exhale. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.